When we look back at the American Civil War, it's so easy to think the Union's victory was a sure thing. I mean, they had more people, all the factories, the money, it seems obvious, right? But what if that's all hindsight? What if the outcome was actually balanced on a knife's edge for years? Let's dig into how this victory was really forged, piece by painful piece.
It sounds crazy now, but when the conflict first erupted, pretty much everyone thought it would be a 90-day war. Just a quick, decisive little fight. You had young men marching off with flowers in their rifles, totally convinced they'd be home by harvest time. It was a war born out of sheer bravado, with almost zero idea of the brutal reality that was about to hit them.
But yeah, that early optimism, it didn't just fade away. It was absolutely shattered. That whole 90-day war idea just exploded into a brutal 4-year catastrophe. We're talking over 600,000 lives lost. It tore the very fabric of the nation apart and pushed both the Union and the Confederacy to their absolute breaking points.
So that's the big question, isn't it? What really separated the winner from the loser? Because let me tell you, it wasn't just one big battle or some brilliant general. Victory was this messy, complicated mix of industrial power, clever strategy, political willpower, and, just the desperate struggle to keep things from falling apart back home.
All right, Section 1, the myth of a quick war, and the brutal reality check that came with it. So let's start right there, with that first, deadliest illusion. This idea that it would be a short, glorious war. This wasn't a myth that was debunked in a newspaper. Oh no, it was destroyed violently on the battlefield.
And that moment of truth, it has a name. The First Battle of Bull Run. Can you even picture this? Washington's high society literally packed picnic baskets and went out to watch what they thought would be a total cakewalk for the Union, an easy march to the Confederate capital. Instead, they got a front row seat to a chaotic, panicked Union retreat, and that's when it hit everyone, on both sides. This was going to be a long, and absolutely horrific war.
Okay, next up, an unbalanced starting line, a tale of two armies. So, once that reality of a long war started to sink in, you gotta look at where each side was starting from. And it's not as simple as just saying one side was stronger. Now, the Union and the Confederacy, they each brought their own, almost opposite set of advantages to the fight.
And when you look at them side by side, the contrast is pretty wild. On one hand, the Confederacy had the immediate military edge. I mean, they were fighting a defensive war on their own home turf. That's a huge advantage. Plus, they had this bench of brilliant battle-tested generals like Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson. The Union's advantages? Well, they were a lot less flashy, but maybe more important in the long run. We're talking people, industry, and a solid government. Basically, the raw materials you need to win a modern war.
And let's just talk about the numbers for a second, because wow, the Union had a population of 22 million people. The Confederacy? Just 9 million. And here's the really crucial part. Nearly 4 million of those people in the South were enslaved. So this wasn't just about having a bigger pool for soldiers. It meant the North could send huge armies to the front lines and still have enough people back home to keep the farms and factories running at full steam. That was a luxury the South just didn't have.
But it goes beyond just people. The Union's industrial power was maybe its ultimate secret weapon. It wasn't just about having factories, it was about being able to churn out rifles, cannons, and uniforms on a scale the mostly agricultural South couldn't even dream of. And the railroads. Controlling most of the country's railways meant the Union could move troops and supplies with a speed that just constantly left the Confederates playing catch-up.
All right, news section. Cracks on the home front. A war within a war. Because here's the thing. All the factories and soldiers in the world don't mean a thing if the people back home aren't behind you. And both sides, faced intense, violent opposition at home. This wasn't just a war between armies, it was a struggle to keep their own societies from completely falling apart from the inside. Seriously, the Union was anything but united. Think about this. In July of 1863, right after the massive Union victory at Gettysburg, New York City just erupted. It turned into one of the deadliest riots in all of American history. For 4 solid days, the city was a literal war zone. It was this shocking reminder of just how fragile public support for Lincoln's war actually was.
And the anger boiled down to this one phrase: a rich man's war, a poor man's fight. The fuel for this fire was just pure class anger. See, a new draft law came out that said any rich guy could pay a $300 fee, which was an absolute fortune back then, to hire someone to fight in his place. So if you were poor or a working-class immigrant, the message was crystal clear. You were being forced to go die in a war that the wealthy could just pay their way out of.
And don't think for a second that things were any better in the South. The Confederacy was facing its own internal collapse. In fact, that same year, 1863, their capital city of Richmond had its own massive riots. But this wasn't about the draft. No, this was about something much more basic, much more terrifying: starvation.
That was the cry, "Our children are starving." You had hundreds of women arming themselves with knives and axes and literally storming shops in the capital. Why? Because out-of-control inflation and crippling food shortages, which were made even worse by the Union blockade, meant people were just suffering. It was this terrifying sign that the Confederate government was failing at its most basic job, feeding its own people.
Okay, so let's get into the Union's grand strategy and how they used their advantages. So the big question is, how did the Union deal with all this chaos at home and actually turn all those raw advantages, the people, the factories, into a real path to victory? Well, it all came down to strategy. A clear, methodical plan to use every single strength they had to slowly choke the life out of the rebellion.
And at the very heart of this was something called the Anaconda Plan. Just think of a giant snake squeezing its prey. It was a two-part strategy designed to do just that to the Confederacy. Step 1. Use the powerful Union Navy to blockade all the southern ports. That would stop their cotton from getting out and, more importantly, stop weapons and supplies from getting in. Step 2. Take control of the Mississippi River. This would literally slice the Confederacy in two and cut off all those crucial supply lines from the West.
But maybe the single biggest strategic move of the entire war wasn't a battle at all. It was a piece of paper, Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation. And look, we rightly remember it today as this giant leap for human freedom, but at the time, its immediate impact was pure strategy. It completely changed what the war was all about.
It was an absolute masterstroke, really. By officially making the war about ending slavery, Lincoln achieved so much all at once. First, it gave the Union a powerful moral high ground. Second, it encouraged thousands of enslaved people to flee the Union lines, which crippled the Southern economy. Third, it opened the door for nearly 200,000 black soldiers to fight for the Union, a huge boost to manpower. And maybe most importantly, it made it politically impossible for countries like Britain and France, who hated slavery, to even think about helping the Confederacy.
Which brings us to our final section, total war to total victory, breaking the will to fight. Because with this new strategy in place, the war entered its final, and by far its most brutal phase. The goal for the Union wasn't just to beat Confederate armies on the battlefield anymore. The new goal was to destroy the South's entire ability and its will to keep the war going. And you can see this shift perfectly at the Siege of Vicksburg. This was it. This was step 2 of the Anaconda Plan becoming a reality. After a long, punishing campaign, General Ulysses S. Grant finally took the city, giving the Union complete control of the Mississippi River. This wasn't just some symbolic victory. This was the plan in action. The Confederacy was now literally cut in two, and its western states were cut off for good.
And Vicksburg really ushered in this new era of what we call total war. It's a brutal strategy, but a horribly effective one. It's where that line between a soldier and a civilian gets really, really blurry. Suddenly, the targets aren't just armies anymore. Now the targets are everything that supports those armies: the railroads, the farms, the factories, and even the morale of the people back home.
This all led to one final brutal year. You basically had this two-pronged attack on the South. In the East, you had Grant just relentlessly hammering away at Robert E. Lee's army. It was a war of attrition. Grant knew he could afford to lose soldiers because the Union had more. Lee couldn't. At the exact same time, you have General Sherman's infamous March to the Sea, which just cut a path of destruction right through the heart of the South. It demolished their infrastructure and sent a terrifying message to the Southern people: your government cannot protect you. This 1-2 punch was just too much, and it all ended with Lee's surrender at Appomattox.
So, when you really break it all down, the anatomy of the Union's victory, it's clear it was anything but guaranteed. It was earned. It was a combination of, yes, overwhelming advantages in people and industry, but also a patient and punishing strategy like the Anaconda Plan. It took decisive leadership from guys like Grant and Lincoln. It took a political masterstroke like the Emancipation Proclamation to change the game. And in the end, it took a brutal, grim willingness to completely dismantle the South's ability to fight back.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? How does knowing all this change your idea of what it actually takes to win a war? Is it just about having the biggest army on the battlefield? Or is it about the strength of your economy, the stability of your society, the power of your ideas, and just that grim, unwavering resolve to see it all the way through to the bitter end? I think when you understand how this victory was really forged, it changes how you think about conflict itself.